Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, we have been discussing drama. In the last class we discussed different types of drama, and when it comes to types I said depending on how you create the taxonomy, the types vary, right. If it is a structural taxonomy, then of course you find different types of drama. If it is a thematic taxonomy, then of course you find different types of drama and all that. And as part of that we also discussed two broad types of drama, comedy and tragedy, and we discussed the tragedy in a bit more detail, right. Different types of tragedy and reasons behind tragedy, and how the very concept of tragedy evolved over time. And when we say the concept of tragedy, not just a part of dramaturgy, because remember drama is a precept of life at the end of the day. So therefore our outlook towards life has evolved. When we say there is a change in the very concept of tragedy, there is a change in the very outlook towards life, right. That is the reason why we have that is the reason why you have tragedy and its different varieties, and how tragedy has evolved over time. We discussed it. In this class we are going to pick up comedy and its different types, and this is a very important development in the growth of drama. Please remember, when we say growth of drama, we talk of Western drama, and we talk of let us say Greek drama in particular. And maybe in the subsequent classes when we pick up when we begin discussing on the growth and origin and growth of drama, we can pick up some interesting tales surrounding the birth of comedy, the birth of comedy and all that. But for our understanding, generally speaking, Aristophanes in the Greek tradition is considered one of the first comedy playwright. He is the first dramatist to have brought out this element of comedy into the play. That is something that we can keep in mind. Now let us move ahead and discuss what actually comedy is. M.H. Abrahams in his now important a glossary of literary terms defines comedy as a work of drama in which settings and intrigue, plot, characters, everything is established in such a way as to amuse the audience. In other words, the purpose of comedy is to entertain the audience. Therefore, you find characters and their discomfitures and the twists in the plot, twists in the tales, all of them are rearranged or arranged and rearranged in such a way so as to cause humor, so as to cause laughter among the audience. That is how he defines comedy, right. And in poetics, we have already identified Aristotle's Poetics as the first major work, critical work that that throws a lot of light on drama, tragedy and comedy, right. He distinguishes comedy from tragedy by saying that it deals in amusing way with ordinary character in rather everyday situations. Now you can get you understand it when you look at it vis-a-vis tragedy. When it comes to tragedy, you must always have the protagonist must always be of high birth, of great lineage, either a king or a noble hero or a general or something like that. Now whereas in comedy, generally it deals with the ordinary characters and everyday situations. That is how Aristotle comes to define comedy, right. Now let us take a quick look at different types of comedy, and of course later we can go on discussing them. Now, sentimental comedy, you have sentimental comedy, comedy of humor, comedy of manners, romantic comedy, theatre of absurd, commedia dell'arte. Then you have farce, burlesque, parody with slight variations there, and when we identify these types of comedy, please remember they are not very exclusive, right, because there may be a playwright or a dramatist who can do a lot of mix and match, right. Therefore, a lot of permutations and combinations are possible within these varieties, but these are generally speaking some broad varieties or flavors of comedy, you can say. Now, let us go ahead and discuss each of them in a little more detailed manner. As I said, comedy has a very interesting origin. We have already identified Aristophanes as the first playwright or a dramatist to have introduced the flavor of comedy, because until then in the Western tradition all that you had was tragedies. Now, interestingly, it so happens that there is a play called Frogs. There is a play called Frogs, and please remember, Athens, ancient Athens was it was obsessed over the performing arts, especially they had some remarkable playwrights by the time Aristophanes began writing. You had Aeschylus, you had Sophocles, and you had Euripides. These are like the triumvirate of the Greek tragedy. And afterwards Aristophanes comes, so now by the time he begins writing plays, you have already seen, the Greeks had already seen the best days or the glorious days of tragedy in through the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides. Now, Aristophanes, there is a play called Frogs. Now, there it's a very interesting play. Now, what happens here? Dionysius, he is you can call him the god of drama. In fact, the origins of drama again have got to do with Dionysius, and we will discuss it more in detail in subsequent classes. So, invoking Dionysius, Aristophanes now wants to find out who of the three is the best playwrights, who is the best dramatist, whether it is Aeschylus or Sophocles or Euripides, right. So, now a kind of now, but by the time he began writing this play, all of them are dead. Now, remember, and Euripides was he just he is the last of the three, and maybe he must have seen a lot of pomp and glory. So, Aristophanes seems to have some kind of a he picks up some kind of bone with Euripides. Now, there was a kind of a dividing opinion among the Greeks between Euripides and Aeschylus as one of the greatest playwrights. So, they are unable to decide. Now, in order to decide it, now Aristophanes using Dionysius, he sends the god of drama to the netherworld, Hades, where of course all of them are there, they are dead, they are there now, Hades, the netherworld. So, a kind of competition takes place in the netherworld, and now each of them, now you have Aeschylus and Euripides. Now, they start they participate in this competition. Now, Aeschylus, in order to support that he is the best playwright, he starts quoting from his plays, and then Euripides starts doing it, and there is some kind of weighing of their lines come. Of course, it's a comedy. Now, remember, So, then very humorous, the entire thing is in a very humorous way. Of course, you also have Dionysus' servant also goes to Hades with him. He is not allowed to enter there, then he creates a lot of he improvises comedy. So, the entire thing is a very beautiful set of comedy there, and then they come to weigh the lines, how much each of these lines weigh, and finally of course Aristophanes makes Aeschylus win the show, and as a result of that Dionysius brings Aeschylus back from the world of dead into the living, and Athens comes to celebrate it. That is the crux of the play. So, now that is probably the first comedy that we have, that is the first comedy we have. See, this is the story of the birth of comedy, right. So, this is something that we can keep in mind. Aristophanes, the originator of comedy, or with him begins the flavor of comedy for us, all right. Now, we said different types of comedy. So, let us begin with sentimental comedy. Sentimental comedy, emerges as a kind of reaction towards restoration comedy, because during restoration, comedy meant slapstick comedy, or not a very vulgar comedy. It meant vulgar comedy and all that. So, as a reaction to that, we receive sentimental comedy. So, Oliver Goldsmith, he defines sentimental comedy as the virtues of private life. Here in sentimental comedy, the virtues of private life are exhibited, and more than exposing the vices, which was the norm during the restoration period, the virtues of them are exposed or exhibited, and the distress caused to them, and that forms the crux of sentimental comedy. Therefore, here keeping with its benevolent ensemble or benevolent theme, you have characters from middle class who are extremely elevated when it comes to their understanding of life, their moral sentiments, and they have lofty ideals, and problems they undergo because of these virtues. Right now, they undergo problems not because they have some vices in them, but because of some virtues they have, and how the virtues they have, it is at crossroads with the norm where the wise rules, the bad things rule, and how the virtuous feel the problem. So, that becomes a part of sentimental comedy. So, you have Richard Steele's The Conscious Lovers, written in the early 18th century, Cumberland's The West Indian, and Oliver Goldsmith, The Good Natured Man. These are some well known examples you can recall for, you can support in support of sentimental comedy. You can quote these particular works. From sentimental comedy, let us go to discuss comedy of humors. Again, this particular type of comedy originated towards the end of 16th century. You have Ben Jonson. Of course, he is a later contemporary of Shakespeare. In fact, he was also influenced a lot by Shakespeare, Ben Jonson. So, maybe you can trace or attribute comedy of humors to Ben Jonson, predominantly speaking. So, here Renaissance theory about the nature and function of comedy is born out of Ben Jonson, that we have already identified. Here comedy of humors is you have in order to expose the vices of the individuals. Of course, maybe you can even say that comedy of the sentimental comedy is a reaction to comedy of humors, right. So, it's they are reacting against the comedy of humors. In comedy of humors, what happens, how the societal vices, the follies and the foibles of society, and how Ben Jonson looks at it and how he satirizes it. So, this forms the crux of comedy of humors. So, you have his own plays, Every Man in His Humour, Volpone, and Bartholomew's Fair. These are some well known works for comedy of humors, late 16th century and early 17th century, and where a lot of lampooning takes place, where a lot of buffoonery takes place, and of course, where a lot of as I said, a lot of obscenities are also made use of here, and in order to create the humorous effect. And against as a sentiment against these kind of comedy of humors, we see the birth of sentimental comedy. So, that can be kept in mind. So, from comedy of humors, we have comedy of manners. In comedy of manners, again, see, these are subtle distinctions. That is the reason why I said these are not exclusive categories, please remember. So, here in comedy of manners, as the title suggests, it's humor is created out of certain mannerisms of individuals, not so much by actions, but by mannerisms. Therefore, here everything is stretched to an extreme, in order to everything is their mannerisms are lampooned, and now they are they are analyzed from a different perspective. So, you have Sheridan's The School of Scandal, or when it comes to modern times you have Oscar Wilde's A Woman of No Importance, or even The Importance of Being Earnest. These are some well known examples of this particular genre of comedy of manners. So, generally speaking here, manners of the upper middle class people and their ignorance and their their lack, they lack a way of, they do not know how to proceed well with in this world. Therefore, you have comedy gets created out of these kind of ignorance and their upper class standards and all that. So, from comedy of manners we go to romantic comedy. Again, Shakespeare himself is a very well known proponent of romantic comedy. Of course, here added to the elements of comedy, you have all the ingredients of comedy plus an element of love. So here it's a in fact this particular type of comedy was predominant especially during the Elizabethan period. It involves a kind of love affair between characters of different social backgrounds or different social backgrounds, yes, and then how the kind of troubles that they have to undergo, and finally of course because remember comedy is where everything has to end in a smooth way, so love affair comes to a wonderful fruition, in a happy union is there, but the kind of problems they undergo, and that becomes the crux of romantic comedy. So you have some well known examples here: Twelfth Night, The Tempest, Much Ado About Nothing. Taming of the Shrew too is as a well known romantic comedy. So these are some things that we can keep in mind when it comes to discussing romantic comedies. So from now you have during Elizabethan time, you again, as we discussed, roughly speaking, you have comedy of humors, you have almost romantic comedy. So what are some of the elements of romantic comedy? In other words, what causes comedy during the Elizabethan period? So now look at this, there is a mistaken identity or misconception. Supposing a character A thinks character B is actually character C, and assuming character C as B, how character A goes on interpreting or interacting with them, and how the character B also goes on ensuring that kind of misconception, and later it reveals something like this. And you have reason versus emotion in Elizabethan romantic comedy. Here of course this kind of distinction is there, reason versus emotion, where they underline the importance of emotion over reason. When it comes to neoclassical period, this particular emphasis is slightly reversed. You have reason over emotion. So it's a kind of neoclassical period, this is reversed. So there reason attains primacy over emotion. And in romantic comedy, especially Elizabethan romantic comedy, you have comedy is created because of separation. So when there is a separation between two loved individuals, what kind of troubles they undergo, the journey that they undertake and the troubles that they undergo, and finally before reconciling, before coming together, what kind of troubles they undergo, it becomes a part of it's presented in a very humorous way, okay. And then you have happy endings. Well, that's true for almost all the types of comedy. Remember, comedy is where it presents the pleasant aspect of life. Remember, we have Aristotle already defining the objective of comedy. In comedy, unlike tragedy, it is to present the sanguine aspect of life, the positive dimensions of life, and of course to create laughter, to create humor and all that. Therefore, despite the troubles, the plot entwines, despite the twists in the plot, despite the cliffhanger moments in the plot, finally everything ends happily. The the protagonist achieves success and the lovers get united, and it finally one happy story, something like this. These are some things that we can keep in mind for romantic comedy. From romantic comedy, let's go to another distinct genre of drama. So I already said, right, you have at the two end of spectrum comedy and tragedy. So tragic comedy is, or you can locate it somewhere in between the two ends of the spectrum. So, again tragic comedy can as well be found in the Elizabethan period, Jacobean period, and more or less even the modern plays also make use of tragic comedies. Here of course, tragedy is there, but ultimately all this tragedy it does not end in a very negative way. So, probably tragic comedy reflects this phenomena called life in a very beautiful way, because in tragedy you have to you are bound to go by the principles of tragedy, and in comedy you are bound to go by the principles of comedy. However improbable the plot is, however improbable the situation is, you have to end it in a happy way. Whereas in tragic comedy it does not happen. Of course, our life is filled with tragic comedy, right, filled with moments of tragedy and of course moments of laughter, moments of humor. So, therefore, tragic comedy better reflects our state of life, the modern state of life in a better way. So, therefore, accordingly we have in tragic comedy members of the middle class or the lower classes, and their troubles and follies and foibles, and finally how they achieve a happy ending. So, this is it. And one of the examples even during the Shakespearean time that we can take off is Merchant of Venice. Remember, why is this a particular tragic comedy? Of course, it is tragedy for Sherlock, and of course, comedy for the other characters. And again, the Merchant of Venice has it is an extraordinary play, and probably a perfect play to that can be a perfect play that can be called a tragic comedy. So, you could read it when time permits. Yeah. From tragic comedy, this is mask drama. So, it is spelt in either of the ways, mask drama or masque. So, mask drama, again this mask drama you find its origins in the 16th century to late 16th century and all that, and even now you find it, we find mask drama. One of the defining features of mask drama is where the character enacts using masks. Masks play a very important role here. Generally it is a comedy. Mask drama is generally a comedy. Here you make use of various elements of drama such as poetry, songs, dance and music, and there is very rich and extravagant costumes, as I said, so all the emotions that so therefore because of the use of masks here, generally the characters are stereotypes. Supposing the character wears the mask of a tragic mask, that means that character throughout portrays that, it is a caricature of things like that. And generally mask drama is arranged in private parties, especially in the parties of the royals and the elites, where they make use of rich costumes, extravagant designs and things like that, and it is a beautiful ensemble of song, dance, music and other things. So, Ben Jonson and Inigo Jones are some well known dramatists who produced mask drama earlier. Yeah, we have chronicle plays. Again, here these are thematic divisions. Please remember, we have already discussed structural divisions in the previous class. So, here chronicle plays, which are also called history plays, here the theme is royalty, the theme is some point in history. So, therefore, comedy that is created when the entire setting, it is based on the setting, remember. So, setting plays an important role. In the elements of drama we discuss setting. So, here this particular play is set in the historical context, and again the comedy that is produced out of it is something that we can keep in mind for chronicle plays. So, some well known examples are Marlowe's Edward II and Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, of course you know that, and then you have Arthur Miller's The Crucible. So, these are some well known examples for chronicle plays. Okay. So, these are some different types of comedy and tragedy that we discussed, and again an active understanding of these types They help the reader in very many ways. Of course, especially when you are analyzing a play, you need to keep these types in mind, because depending on the type you have character, depending on the type you have setting, depending on the type you have certain plots and twists in the plot and all that. Therefore, once you can identify the type of the play, then definitely it increases our overall grasp of the play in a particular way. All right. So, I hope you enjoyed our discussion of types of drama. In the next class, we come up with something more interesting. Of course, remember we have already discussed poetry, fiction, short fiction, and we are going to occupy ourselves with discussion of drama even in the subsequent classes. All right. Until then, take care. We will meet you with something more interesting in the next class.